Okay, we're going to go into the Git workflow, but I realized after rewatching the end of this one that I only cleaned the first repo, and you need to do both. So I'll start by doing that and getting right into this one, which is setting up some local global setups for on your local system and doing the workflow. So let's start by though. I'm going to go ahead and in GitHub clone my other repo. So I'm going to go back to the organization. Again, I have two here. And now I have to remember which one did I do first. Now I'm moving now between apps fairly quickly, so I apologize if that gets a little much. So I'm going to go, I already have VS Code open. I closed it. Now I have it open and I did the public. So now I'll do the private one. Now, in order to have this in the right place, what I want to do here is I want to open this folder. So I can just, actually I can just open terminal. Let's see where it opens to. Yeah, so it opens to that location that I have the folder that holds the repos. Okay, so I'll start with the command again. I'm using git bash, git clone, and come back over to, oh, I meant to switch. I'm not sure why. I'm actually using a different keyboard on Windows or my Mac keyboard. It's a little confused. So now we're going to do private. I'm going to grab that HTTPS. There are other options. I didn't talk about this last time, but we are doing it over HTTPS. You will learn as you grow in your experience with GitHub the reasons why you would use SSH. And then this is actually fairly new. GitHub has built its own CLI command line interface. But for us, we're going to be using the standard GitHub commands. So I'm copying this. I'm going to come back down here and git clone, making sure I'm in the right location because the idea is we want to have both the pub and the private in the same level. So you'll see what I mean here. So again, right click immediately comes in and there is the private. Oh, very nice. This is interesting because this is where I was thinking it would ask me before. Okay. So I'm going to show you in a minute how to grab this. By default, you can do a web browser, but I'm going to show you how to do the personal access token because this is really what I think long-term you probably want to do. And what this is doing is it's asking you, interesting, it didn't ask me to authenticate on the other one. Oh, that's because it was public and this one is private. Now it makes sense. Anyway, I'll talk more about that later. So what we're going to do is I'm going to stop right here because I had actually kind of prepped thinking it was going to ask me for this personal access token. Now, what is this? This is actually your password that GitHub generates a token to represent your password because passing a password across the network is not secure. So what it's going to do is it's going to create the token, which basically is going to take that, encrypt that password, and now you will get a token. Let me show you how to get this, so to speak. So I'm going to go back into GitHub. I'm going to go down to my account. I'm going to go down to settings. Okay. And under settings, go all the way down until you see developer settings. So it's after the first block. It's in the single block by itself. Hit developer settings, hit personal access tokens. Now I'd already set up one, right? But I'm just going to show you, the one I'm about to show you is not one I'm going to use. By the way, YouTube, so don't try to use it. But I just want to show you what you want to do. So you want to generate a new token. I ended up calling it my Windows, right? This is just an example. And there's a lot of options here. All you really need is the repo. And all the rest of this is just for more sophisticated things you can do, higher end stuff we're not going to do. And you might think, well, workflow is something we're doing next, but it is, but not using GitHub Actions. That's why. So only use here, right? And then it will do is generate a token. Now, this token again, you got to copy this real quick, okay? What happened, the reason I say real quick is once you refresh the screen, it goes away. And I already have a token on my local system that I'm going to use that represents my password. But, and I just want to show you the reason you got to grab this is as soon as you hit refresh, it only shows up once for security purposes. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2, and then I'm going to do paste. I'm going to paste that token. Oh yeah, Control V. I think, did it get it? Oh, it didn't. Okay. No, I'm going to hit cancel because for some reason my token, let's try it again. Maybe it just didn't. Oh, it looks like there's a keyboard binding problem there. I love live coding stuff. All right, let me pause for just a second while I figure this out. I think it's just a keyboard binding on the terminal. It's not letting me copy and paste that. So let me pause for just a second. So interesting. As soon as I dropped that, I realized it was waiting up here. So I'm actually going to do this without stopping it. So I'm going to give it my username. Right now, here's where you're going to give it your token. Right. For some reason on the command line, there must have been something that didn't like it. So just look for this when you're doing this, and let's hope that this totally works. And then just paste it. Oh, good. It looks like it did. Sweet, right? Oh, that's so interesting. I love the way things, I'm going to do a clear command real quick. I love the things that work out for your benefit sometimes because I didn't clone that private repo at the end of the last video, but I'm going to have to do this authentication anyway here. And so that's what we ended up starting with. Anyway, I just love how things work out. I hope that was not too confusing, but I just want you to know that what you should end up with here, besides that idea of the token, really important. And I think that helper, we're going to find out in a minute if we have to do this each time. And if not, I'll give you some instruction later, maybe in week 1, about how to save that. Okay, so but coming back here, this is the piece now that we're in here. Now we're actually going to want to start doing this right here where we set up our, and I'm just going to copy because I don't want to type. I'm going to be lazy for a minute. I'm going to copy this, which is the first command. So now in my GitHub here, right? I think I can just do this. Let's find out. Oh, good. My username, and I think you have to do this in quotes. Oh, it's going to my other screen, right? So then quotes, you do your, actually, sorry, this is your username. This is actually your full name, which you do here, right? Good. And then go to the next command. So what you're basically doing here is you're setting up, and I'm just being not lazy. It's just hard to type and record, honestly. And the nice thing again is as soon as I right click, it does it. So this is the email that you've used for your account. Good. Let's see here. And then what you can do here is you can just list this. So what this does is it allows you to just list out the setup so that you know that what is set up for you locally. You want your username to be the name you used, and you want your email here. Okay, so this is a one-time step, and this is what I say here, is that these are one-time. Oh, I ended up refreshing this. Oh yeah, so these are one-time. I should have said this here as well. I'll fix the content, but these you only have to do one time before you actually start into modifying code. But we're going to do that next. Okay, so now before we do this, and here is the workflow itself. So let me just give you a little bit of content to help you kind of understand this process. So I'm going to go back to GitHub. Okay, the web interface. Here is my, and we'll just start with our private one. These are the 2 files that got created on GitHub when I created my repos. These are now the same files that if I click into private and I click open, these are the same files, both of these, on my local system. So we've done all this work so that we can now modify code on our local systems and push it into GitHub. Okay, so I'm actually going to start with one that is a little different, but is basically the same as anything that you would do. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have this up where, like I told you, this is actually not for VS Code. So there's a really good example somewhere out here. I think it's here. I think I have it. Am I clicking the wrong one? Oh, I must have moved it over. Hold on. There it is. I'm like, why isn't it going to here? In here, I've given you a link to an example for what VS Code just needs. So what you can do is copy these lines. So what we're doing here is we're updating our git ignore, but it's the same process, and I will show you when we actually code locally. So I clicked on this link here. I'm going to go into my VS Code with that git ignore. I'm going to do a Control A to select all the content, and I'm going to do a Control V to paste over it. Okay, it's just an easier way. Now notice I had actually turned off the autosave, so I'm going to hit File, Autosave here, and it automatically saves the file locally. What it doesn't do is move that or do the Git workflow that we're about to do. Okay, so I'm going to, and by the way, notice also how on VS Code it will change the color for files. Now, in this case, these are files that are already tracked. I'll show you an example probably in week 1 for new files, but it's the basic same process. So I'm going to come down here because I now have a change to one of my files. I'll do another one where we actually do the same process. And by the way, you're going to need to duplicate this also. And you could do it now if you wanted, but you also have to do the workflow from each folder. So just kind of watch what I do here and then duplicate the same thing into your public repo as well. Okay. Okay. So now I'm going to do that little trick where I say open in terminal, and what that does is it changes to that repo. So if I do an ls, I get the same listing, but notice how the git ignore is actually not showing here because it is a system hidden file. We can see it in the editor, but not at the command line, but we can see we're in the right folder. Okay, so now we're actually ready to do this process. So every time you modify code, okay, what you're going to do here is do a git status. So git status will show us, in this case, we have a file that's been modified. Okay, now we can also see this when we look at the file itself, but this is when you're coding. And so again, as you get used to this, after a couple of times of doing it, you'll have it down. So we're going to git add. And in this case, this is a wildcard that we could do if we had multiple files. So it says add anything that's been changed. But in this case, we're actually going to type the actual name out. And this is something that you will get used to. So git add dot git ignore. Now I ended up using that tab to where I type .git and hit tab, and it automatically knew based on the folder and the files what was in there. So now I'm adding that into my local repo, my changes that I've done. So I've looked at the status, I've added it, and now I'm going to do a git commit -m. I'm going to say updating git, and I could just do git. Now, these messages we'll talk about, but basically you're just giving it a message, a text, some kind of content that tells Git, in this case, the version control, what you're doing. Okay. All right. So what I've done here now, and notice how this is no longer yellow. This has now been committed into my local repo on my system. Now, let me just show you. If I come over to GitHub and I look at that git ignore, it's still the old version that I default set up for action script or something. And that's because the process that we just did only updates it for the repo because it's a tracking. It tracks every keystroke, everything that you change, not every keystroke, everything that you changed on your code. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do the very last step, which is we're going to push this code. now we're going to, this is the step we just did, and now we're going to push this in from our local system into GitHub. Okay. So Git push. Now there may be a message here. Oh, good. No message of logging in because it already had my login from what I did before, which is awesome. And by doing this step now, when I go to GitHub and I just hit refresh real quick, what I see is now that version of the file that I modified and then walk through the Git workflow is now on GitHub. Now, why are we doing this? We're doing this so that now you can share the code with me. I can see your commit, something that's important that I'll talk about later. As a matter of fact, you can see the commit here that I just did 1 minute ago. And I'll show you how to submit your code into Canvas by just giving me a URL. Okay, so here's your, actually I've redone this, so I don't think this last part is no longer necessary, but here's what I want you to do, is I want you to actually update with some kind of content. Now this is the README file, but the process now of doing, I'm going to do a clear, of actually doing the workflow process of modifying code. Again, it's auto save, so I don't actually have to save the file, but what I do need to do is walk through the Git workflow. So do you remember what it was? Let's just look. Let's see. I'm on the private repo, which here is what I've changed. By the way, when you're done, I want you to do the same thing on your public one for experience. So I'm going to say Git status. Going to tell me, oh, the README file is modified, which you can also see visually. Be nice if they match the colors, but it doesn't, right? So now it actually tells you what you can do. Now in this case, I can actually do Git, if I had multiple files here, I could do Git add star that modifies them all, or I could just say R, capital R, hit tab, and it automatically reads because there's only one file with a capital R. So I'm going to do Git add that file, and then I'm going to do Git commit -m. Okay, I'm going to say updating readme.md file, which is a markdown file. Again, what I've done here is I've committed the changes that I've done to code into my local repo on my local system. And so the last step is Git push. Okay. Good. So now when I go out to the interface on GitHub, what I see is that that file has now been, let me make sure. I was on the private one. I did update here. I love it when things are just a little bit laggy. Oh, look, that's a good point. I thought it would be in a new line, and that's because of Markdown. Okay, so Markdown actually requires you to do it differently to put it on a new line. But it did get the update, and that's cool. All right, so your job now, is to actually do this now on the other repo, the same thing where you update the git ignore, you make some kind of change to the README file in your public one, and you complete the GitHub workflow and see that they have actually successfully been updated on GitHub. Right. So, and then mark this as done. Oh, I'm not in the student view. Okay. So mark this. I'm going to actually modify this content because we no longer need this because we've already done it. Okay. And we'll talk more about this as we move into the course. But for this point, I can say, go ahead, I'm done with this, and then go to the next item. And the last item here, okay, is really just the final thing you need to do to say, I'm ready to go, right? Is you want to, and here's my question is, how did it go, right? Did you run into any issues? And what's, I guess, kind of hard here is that because we waited till the end to ask you, I just wanted you to know you didn't have to wait till the end to ask for help. Up in the start file, on the start here, I gave you a link to a Discord great place to ask for help. You can reach out to me in the inbox here in Canvas. Typically, though, I will say in most cases, ask in the Discord, right? Make sure you join our Discord channel. I will have talked about this by now, or you will have heard me talk about this. I actually haven't recorded that video yet. I'll be recording that next now that I've gotten through this and I kind of know where the stumbling points might be. But one of the things I want to say is introduce yourself first, right? Introduce yourself and then just briefly talk about, how was that for you? Did it go off without a hitch? Did you have any challenges and what those might have been? Okay, so now here's my thing is that if you've gotten through this and I understand that this is a lot of content. And because, anyway, I know that this is a lot of content and we're not even into week 1 yet, which we're going to get into now. But this is great stuff to know how to do. Most students I've dealt with say they really appreciated learning. Some students come in with some command line Git experience, many do not. And so you're at least getting that intro here. But now I'll actually talk about how we use the Udemy course from here on out and what you have to watch and what you don't. But at this point, just tell us, right, how to go. All right. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.